Do you remember the episode of The Simpsons where Bart takes a job as Krusty's assistant and promptly destroys the entire set? "I didn't do it," he says right away. Everyone laughs and gets a little out of hand. Deny it ever happened.
"I didn't do it."
And if at all possible, make sure no one ever finds out. In the past, there have been many catastrophes that have been attempted to be swept under the rug. You might even wonder, how could that happen? And how did the cover turn out to be? Hello everyone, and welcome to our channel, where we share stories from history that no one knew. In today's video, we are going to bring you 10 historic disasters that people tried to cover up. Stay with us till the end of the video to learn all about the historic cover-ups. Before we begin with the video, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you get notified when we come back to another amazing video. Alright, let's get started. On number 10, we have the Chernobyl disaster. No disaster in the last century has arguably been as significant as the disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear power facility. The Chernobyl disaster in 1986 was caused by a faulty reactor design that was operated by people who were not properly qualified. The resulting steam explosion and fires released at least 5% of the radioactive reactor core into the environment, with the deposition of radioactive materials in many parts of Europe. Prior to the disaster and a subsequent evacuation, it was home to around 14,000 people. So how horrible did the cover-up turn out to be? They had already started lying when Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet Union's leader, was notified. The reactor was alright, but there was a fire. He was informed. Because of the late hour, he didn't bother phoning anybody else when he was notified. It would be another 18 hours before anyone even acknowledged that the reactor had melted down. Nowadays, the town is still home to around 690 people, although it's now somewhat of a ghost town, with animals occupying many abandoned buildings. Scary, isn't it? On number 9, we have the Kyshtym disaster. Staying in the Soviet Union, the Kyshtym disaster was yet another disaster that the government tried to hide. However, this time it was considerably more successful than Chernobyl. This one would go ignored for decades by the rest of the globe. A 160-ton cement lid was blasted into the air when the subterranean storage facility detonated. Then it blew up, releasing a tremendous cloud of radioactive vapor that contaminated 9,000 square miles. Villages and farms in the area had to be demolished. People were transported and crops were buried. People in the safe society attempted to flee, but many returned after realizing that life outside, with fewer money and food, was far more difficult. Thousands of people were evacuated, and hundreds died as a result. Full incident was not made public until 1979, when a book was released about it. The Kyshtym disaster was named after the adjacent settlement of Kyshtym, which was the only place on Soviet maps. On number 8, we have the Xichang rocket disaster. Have you ever heard about a rocket disaster? In 1996, Space Systems Laurel, an American business, was working in Xichang, China. They were planned to launch a communications satellite, but things went horribly wrong on February 15th. The rocket, which was supposed to propel the satellite into space and was China's largest launch vehicle ever, failed shortly after takeoff, smashing into a nearby town. The state news agency only announced that the launch had failed, not that the rocket had crashed and exploded on the day of the launch. A more complete report 2 weeks later found a reason and stated that 49 of the 57 wounded had already been discharged from the hospital and that 6 individuals had died. The official death toll remained at 6. The next day, Americans who had been on hand for the launch investigated the devastation. A large portion of the town was devastated, and numerous vehicles and ambulances were present. There were no bodies visible, but what appeared to be covered bodies were being trucked away. How horrible is that? On number 7, we have the 1927 Mississippi flood. Heavy rainfall over the course of a year caused major flooding, with the Mississippi River reaching 80 miles wide at times. The death toll was believed to be between 250 and 1,000 people, with more than 600,000 people displaced and 23,000 square miles of land flooded. However, Herbert Hoover, the Secretary of Commerce, and the Red Cross collaborated to generate funds for the victims while also covering up terrible maltreatment of the disaster's black victims. The majority of relief efforts were placed in the hands of black laborers. To avert more damage, they reinforced the levees. They did so despite a dearth of flood and medical treatment, and only the white people were evacuated as the situation worsened. the African American workmen were left with nothing to eat. Those who had lost their homes fled to relief camps, which were supposed to be safe havens with food and water. Those who were stranded there, however, were compelled to labor repairing levees. One individual who refused to do the labor was shot, according to reports. Herbert Hoover wanted these violations hushed up in order to collect donations and continue to give aid. He would go on to be known as the Great Humanitarian and became president, largely as a result of how he handled the disaster. On number 6, we have Exercise Tiger. During World War II, on the night of April 27, 1944, a tragic tragedy occurred close off the coast of Devon, right off Slapton Sands. During Exercise Tiger, the rehearsals for the D-Day landing on Utah Beach in Normandy, France, over Americans lost their lives. 4 German E-boats were on the lookout and launched an attack. 2 landing ships were immediately sunk and a third was severely damaged. Those who survived the attacks were faced with either flaming oil or freezing rain. Before rescuers arrived, many will would succumb to hypothermia. Military leaders had not expected an attack and had kept the story a secret, fearing that news would spread and harm morale. On Utah Beach, fewer soldiers perished than during Exercise Tiger. On number 5, we have the Netherlands disaster. Do you know about the Netherlands disaster? It is actually remembered by the name of the man who caused it. During the Cold War, Marshal Mitch van Nederland was an aspirant military officer who ascended to head the Soviet Union's strategic missile forces. The development on the R-16 was ahead of schedule, according to Soviet rocket designer Boris Chertov's landmark history rockets and people, with a target date of July 1961 for the first launch. When Nederland upped the ante, he would launch on November 7th, in the time for the 43rd anniversary of the Soviet Revolution. Nederland's desire to shine cost him his life, as well as the lives of roughly 100 other people. Due to the tight timeline, weary personnel took a variety of shortcuts and dangers, including continuing to work on the missile after it had been fully fueled on the launch pad at Baikonur, with 250 milling around within close range. On the evening of October 24th, a sequence of failures culminated in a rocketeer's worst nightmare. The R-16's second stage ignited on the pad while still linked to the first stage below it, which detonated instantaneously. After it was determined that anybody who had been there had been sufficiently punished, no one was formally blamed. Families were forced to remain silent for years, and it wasn't until the 1980s that the truth was revealed. On number 4, we have the Burned-In Park disaster. We've all heard stories of soccer hooligans, and the reputation is occasionally justified. The Burned-In Park disaster of 1946 was one of the worst moments in soccer history. 33 supporters perished in the stadium on the day the game was scheduled to begin. The game did, however, begin, and they continued to play as bodies were supposedly hidden on the sidelines. It was the first competitive match between the two countries since World War II. The crowd was ecstatic. The stadium had a seating capacity of 70,000 people. An estimated 85,000 people attended. Hundreds of people were hurt and 33 people died as a result of the stampede. The players were advised to just go on because the majority of the audience had no idea. Thousands of people were kept in the dark, cheering on a game with no understanding what had happened as thousands of compatriots lay dead or severely injured. On number 3, we have the Benton fireworks disaster. Yeah, you have heard it right. The fireworks caused this disaster. This is why we always advise you guys to stay away from fireworks. The Benton fireworks disaster is unique in the realm of cover-ups since the entire event was staged before it occurred. A manufacturing explosion in Benton, Tennessee killed 11 people in 1983. The facility was producing illegal fireworks, and the entire operation was concealed as a worm farm. People were paid in cash, and everything was kept under wraps for reasons that became clear when the building blew up. None of the personnel had been adequately trained in handling explosives, and the way things were handled is almost comical. People packed the pyrotechnics with chemical stuff, according to one of the survivors, and her task was to add some liquid glass and a fuse. The explosive materials were combined by hand, and another employer indicated that they were trying something new on the day of the explosion. It's possible they tried to mix it with an electrical appliance. Of course, detectives discovered cartons of cigarettes and a lighter among the wreckage, implying that someone was smoking within the structure. The blast could be heard 20 kilometers away, and rescuers had to sift through people and body parts. On number 2, we have the Sverdlovsk air disaster. There are 2 layers to this story. both of which provide insight into Soviet cover-ups, although one appears to have more evidence than the other. A plane carrying the majority of the Soviet Air Force hockey team crashed near Sverdlovsk in 1950. 11 players, as well as the team doctor and masseuse, died as a result of the accident. And what about the second story? Vasily Stalin, Joseph Stalin's son, is said to have been in control of the team because he didn't want to offend his father. As a result, he never told him. According to legend, the younger Stalin simply formed a new hockey team, and his father, who was never a great admirer of the sport to begin with, was completely unaware. It's difficult to say whether that element of the story is true, despite the fact that it's been widely published. On number 1, we have the Banqiao Dam disaster. It's no easy feat to conceal the deaths of 230,000 people, but the Chinese authorities succeeded. When Typhoon Nina struck in 1975, the dam was one of several that couldn't survive the force of the storm and collapsed. In a single day, the region was flooded by a year's worth of rain. 65 dams had collapsed in 3 days. Everything was pointing towards Banqiao like dominoes in a chain. Despite all the major issues, including the fact that the sluice gates were clogged, the dam was expected to hold. Chen Xing, a hydraulist, tried to warn the government that the dam was being built incorrectly and was doomed to fail. He was sacked because he was an agitator. The dam burst, releasing 600 billion liters of water onto the nearby community. This equates to around 240,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. 1.1 million people were still stranded a week later as bodies floated in the flood waters. The government didn't release a report on the tragedy until 1989, claiming that 85,000 people died instantly. A total of 230,000 people died as a result of starvation and sickness. So, these were the 10 historic disasters that have been covered up. What do you think is the most remarkable one? Let us know in the comments section below. If you find the video helpful, give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to share the video with your friends and family who should know these historic disasters. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.